Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. I'm thrilled to finally be coming to you today with a Shakespeare Journey Tag. I had intended to get this out immediately after the hosts, Kelly, Jason, and Nicole, put it up at the beginning of the month. And I was hoping to be able to invite a special guest who knows much more about Shakespeare than I do to film the tag with me. More on that in a minute. But unfortunately, over the last few weeks, we've had a health issue in my family that we've needed to address. And right now, anything involving health issues is a bit overwhelming. But I think things have calmed down enough for me to film a video today. I've been eagerly looking forward to Shaketember all year long. I'm going to answer the questions out of order, and I might even cheat a little on a couple of them. So here goes. Are there any people that have played a significant role in your Shakespeare journey? By far the most important guide I have had on my Shakespeare journey is my son, Abe. He's been a guest on this channel a few times, and almost every time he's been here to talk with me about his love of Shakespeare. I'll try to leave links to some of his guest appearances down in the comments. After graduating from college a year ago, he's become a theater sound engineer, and he's also recently been accepted to give an academic paper about Shakespeare's use of folk music at a very special conference this autumn. Sadly, he can't join me here this month, but he's promised to come back when he has a bit more time and flexibility. Next, what was your first experience reading Shakespeare, and what was it like? Like so many of you, perhaps especially the American readers, I was exposed to Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, and Julius Caesar back when I was in high school. Unfortunately, I was not lucky enough to have teachers who were particularly excited about Shakespeare. I liked the plays just fine, but not enough to search out anything additional on my own. What changed everything for me was when my son first experienced Shakespeare. I've told a long version elsewhere, so here's an abridgment. David and I were searching for free entertainment on an upcoming summer evening. For us, our just-turned 5-year-old son, and David's parents who were visiting. After looking through community calendars in the newspaper, we decided on a free outdoor performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream. I was prepared to take our kid out of the performance area anytime he got too fidgety. But I figured if we kept him plied with snacks, and if he already knew what was going to happen on stage, it might be less likely for him to have a meltdown. So we went to the library and checked out a couple of picture books, an edition of Lamb's Tales, and a couple of videotapes. And within moments, it seemed, Abe was absolutely obsessed. All week long, we read those books and watched the videotapes again and again at his request. When we finally arrived at our seats, Abe sat on my lap so he could see over the tall people sitting in front of us, right on the aisle so I could whisk him out quickly if it became necessary. And sure enough, he wasn't quiet during the play. But he wasn't fussy either. Instead, he was reciting all of the main lines aloud, along with the cast. Luckily, the people sitting in the seats surrounding us were amused and charmed. If you're interested in how his interest progressed over the following years, feel free to check out the older videos I'll link to below. Okay, what tips would you give to intimidated readers coming to Shakespeare for the first time? Well, I must say that preparing a little in advance with children's books or movie versions or retellings from Lamb's Tales to No Fear Shakespeare, and then immediately following up with a really good staged production seemed to work pretty well to instill a little bardolatry. And here's a specific resource you might look into. A series of half-hour adaptations for young people, filmed in assorted ways, including with beautiful puppets in some, and animation in others, etc., called Shakespeare: The Animated Tales. They're a bit out of date in a lot of ways now, but the thing I love about these is that they both clarify and simplify the plot a bit, but really emphasize Shakespeare's language. They were a huge reason why Abe recognized those lines when he was sitting there on my lap, and knew them well enough to recite them. Most of the animated tales are on YouTube, and I've left a link to one playlist I found. Next, has the reading of a Shakespeare play ever brought you to tears? What scene was it, and where were you when it happened? I don't think a reading of a play has made me cry, but I started crying at Shakespeare in that same week when Abe was first becoming a Shakespearean. First, we watched a wonderful 1999 film version of A Midsummer Night's Dream with Kevin Kline as Bottom, Michelle Pfeiffer as Titania, and Rupert Everett as Oberon, Stanley Tucci as Puck, etc. Near the end of Shakespeare's play, when the rude mechanicals are putting on their ridiculous presentation of the play within a play for wedding entertainment, we see the character Flute playing the female lover Thisbe. She's talking about her now dead love Pyramus with his cherry red nose, etc., and everyone is laughing. And then in this production, Flute takes off his wig and stops using his super high-pitched silly voice, and he grieves openly and honestly. It's an astonishing scene, and I'll include a YouTube link to that scene down in the description box. And then, when we went to see the outdoor performance a few days later, the way the play was staged used doubling. That is, having some of the characters play two different roles or more. Originally so the acting troupe could stay fairly small, but also because it makes for specific kinds of resonances in the viewers' minds. Doubling seems to have been quite important from Shakespeare's day on. Well, in Midsummer, the same person who plays the fairy queen, Titania, often plays Hippolyta, more or less the human queen, as well. And the person who plays the fairy king, Oberon, often plays Theseus, the human parallel. That night at the outdoor performance, I didn't yet know about the idea of doubling, and I found it extremely interesting and powerful. There's a young Indian boy that Titania cares for, and while he has no lines, and often isn't even on stage at all, just talked about, his role in the relationship between Oberon and Titania is pretty key to the action of the play. In this particular performance we were watching that night, they did something I haven't seen elsewhere. The boy appeared on stage not only as Titania's ward, but as a child that Hippolyta brings into her marriage with Theseus. There's no change in Shakespeare's words, just solely what was on stage. The presence of the boy made the tension between Theseus and Hippolyta that much more understandable by drawing yet another parallel with the story of Oberon and Titania. I found it deeply moving, and it made me tear up. On to the next question. Do you have a favorite book or film about Shakespeare? I want to mention a couple of video series that are both available on YouTube, not about Shakespeare's life, but about how actors bring life to Shakespeare's words. One is John Barton's set of masterclasses for Shakespearean actors called Playing Shakespeare. In these videos, the actor guinea pigs include a young Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, David Suchet, Ben Kingsley, my beloved Judi Dench, etc., all in the very early parts of their careers. One of my favorite scenes is when Barton coaches Ian McKellen through a whole variety of ways he might say the first line of The Merchant of Venice. In sooth, I know not why I am so sad, with massively different emotions and intentions. Go check it out. I'll leave a YouTube link specifically to that scene, but the whole series is fantastic. There's a somewhat similar masterclass called Working Shakespeare with Cecily Berry, coaching a lot of similarly famous American actors through monologues and other performances. My favorite scene in this masterclass is a discussion of Sonnet 138 with Samuel L. Jackson standing on the stairs with what Berry calls a mate, laughing as he begins to see all the puns in that sonnet, and delivering a wonderfully funny and moving version. Again, I'll leave a link to that specific scene. Next, what is your favorite Shakespeare play and why? I absolutely love The Winter's Tale. When people ask me why I love it so, I sometimes say something about how I find it interesting to essentially combine tragedy and comedy in one play. Sometimes I talk about how it is fairly easy to think of at least some elements of the play in a feminist way. But often I talk about how it's the story of how one character's distrust and cruelty makes him suffer deeply himself, and makes him suffer so profoundly that he begins to change, to understand that what he did not only hurt him, but was devastating to other people too. And when he at least starts to understand that fact, a kind of reconciliation starts to seem possible. He acknowledges what he's done, at least in part, and because of that, the other people in his life are able to make at least the first steps towards forgiveness. I love that it isn't a completely done deal of forgiveness at the end, but both sides are on the path. This weekend, when I was yet again trying to catch up on BookTube, I watched Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse talk about why he loves the play The Tempest, and his reasoning was fairly similar to what I see in A Winter's Tale. Both The Tempest and The Winter's Tale are sometimes called not comedies or tragedies, but romances, or the problem plays, or etc. But what unites them, it seems to me, is that they're profoundly about grace in some way. Some people interpret the play to say that the action of grace comes when one starts to believe in the magical. Others take the last word in the line, "It's required you do awake your faith," quite literally, and see that grace in a religious way, in a Christian way. As a completely secular and culturally Jewish person, I see that grace as deeply human, and the required faith to be faith in other people. And I think that way of seeing it works too. The next question is, which character in Shakespeare most resembles you, and in what ways? For years, I've identified most with Paulina in The Winter's Tale, a character who is not the character we first assume is the main female lead, or the character we see as the female lead in the second half of the play. Instead, Paulina is this strong and outspoken character who is committed to what she sees as ethical action. At the same time, she's a woman of relatively mature years who often works fairly quietly to facilitate the key transformations of the play. Roz at Scallydangling About the Books also chose Paulina, and I hope she's willing to share the role with me. Okay, which play would you most like to see performed in a theater, and why? Over the last 20 years, since my son fell in love with Shakespeare at that outdoor performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream, I've gone to see performances of all of Shakespeare's plays, and most of them I've seen multiple times in different theaters, often with radically different styles of production. I'd almost rather see a play I know really well and have seen performed in a whole range of ways, just because it starts to become easier and easier to spot new places where actors and directors are making choices about how to say a line or what to do on stage, etc., sticking precisely to what Shakespeare says, but opening up every little space that remains undefined. I can never see The Winter's Tale too often, or Hamlet, or Henry IV Part 1, or As You Like It, Macbeth, Twelfth Night, Lear. Pretty much whatever gets listed when my favorite theaters send out their season schedule, I'm thrilled. Another question is, do any of Shakespeare's plays intimidate you? If yes, what play and why? intimidated might be the wrong word, but I still feel discombobulated when I read the text of or see a performance of Taming of the Shrew. The gender issues in a lot of Shakespeare's plays are, well, not exactly today's gender politics, but that's fine. Some plays seem remarkably feminist for their time, in some ways at least, like As You Like It. And some seem really complicated, but not actually completely closed off to me, like Measure for Measure, with its portrayal of gender. But Taming of the Shrew only seems less horrifying to me if Shakespeare's language is actually changed a fair bit. I've seen a couple of great productions that make an interesting ending by changing who says specific lines, for example. I often find that kind of playful switch fascinating. Playful in the sense that the entire audience is fully in on the joke, knowing that the production is playing with the play. When it is more subtle, I sometimes feel uneasy. Not about the idea of changing Shakespeare's specific words per se, they're often changed to fit staging conditions, but the idea of radically changing the meaning that Shakespeare seemed to intend is another matter. I know some people think the frame story of Shrew makes it a bit more palatable, but I still feel at sea every time I watch a performance. And after the show, I usually feel, well, seasick. On to a really different kind of question. What actor throughout history would you most like to have seen play Hamlet while in his prime? Given how late I am to doing this tag, I'm going to change this one up a bit and ask who would I like to see play Ophelia while in her prime. And I would choose a young Ingrid Bergman. She's played a lot of incredibly charismatic women who have this deep inner dignity, but who nevertheless get railroaded by men who've said they love her. In Casablanca, but especially in Gaslight. I wonder what she would have done with the role back when she was young. Okay, the last prompt in my reordering of these questions is to deliver a favorite speech or soliloquy from a Shakespeare play. I'll share Titania's lines from A Midsummer Night's Dream about that Indian boy she's caring for. Her partner Oberon is trying to take him from her, and she responds, "The fairyland buys not the child of me. His mother was a votress of my order, and in the spiced Indian air by night, full often hath she gossiped by my side, and sat with me on Neptune's yellow sands, marking the embarked traders on the flood, when we have laughed to see the sails conceive and grow big-bellied with the wanton wind, which she, with pretty and with swimming gait, following, her womb then rich with my young squire, would imitate and sail upon the land to fetch me trifles and return again, as from a voyage, rich with merchandise. But she, being mortal, of that boy did die, and for her sake do I rear up her boy, and for her sake I will not part with him." I love the pregnancy imagery applied to the ships here, and then the ship imagery applied to the pregnant woman. Well, that will do it for today. Thanks for joining me. See you again soon here on Hannah's Books.